Tune in for a collection of interviews from guests who are transforming the lives of people living with disability.
As soon as you start putting them on the therapy, as soon as they start getting the injections, they just want more. They see better, their vision comes back, and they start to read again, they start to drive their car again, and it changes their whole lifestyle. It gives them back their freedom.
The Pulse. Listen Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio.
This is an AMI podcast.
I'm Joeita Gupta, and this is The Pulse. Described video or audio description makes TV programs or movies accessible to people who are blind or visually impaired. Described video is a narrated description of a program's main visual elements, such as settings, costumes, and body language. The increased availability of DV has changed the way people who are blind interact with television and movies. It's not that people who are blind don't watch TV or don't like to go to the movies, but DV has enabled greater independence and dignity for a blind audience. But little is known about the people doing the describing. What do they take into consideration? What are the challenges and the tricks of the trade? Today, we discuss described video. It's time to put your finger on the pulse. Hello and welcome to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Joeita Gupta. It's always very exciting to have a chance to go behind the scenes. Like many of you, I rely on described video and often feel the loss of described video when I have to watch a show without it, to be perfectly honest with you. So I'm really pleased to welcome to the show Valerie Hunter, who is the founder of Valerie H Productions and an expert in described video. Valerie, welcome to the program. So nice of you to take a couple of minutes out of your day to chat with us.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate being asked. It's great to be here.
So when and how did you get into described video?
Well, funnily enough, it involves a lot your predecessor, AMI Audio's predecessor, VoicePrint. I've been in radio for much of my life, and when I was transitioning out of that career, I was, doing various things in voiceover and ended up volunteering at the National Broadcast Reading Service in Toronto, and did that. That was back in the late 90s, and it wasn't until then when I was looking into maybe a script editing job there or something like that, that I spoke to the big boss going, so has anybody got that new job there? And he was like, well, no, but you used to be in radio, right? And I'm like, yeah, because I was a DJ and did production. And he said, well, we do this thing down the hall. Back then, VoicePrint and Audiovision Canada, which I learned about, was in this portable in back of an old school. And down the hall, which I'd never been, was Audiovision Canada, which is the predecessor of AMI, the TV channel. And so I went down there and looked around, and it was only then, about, I'm going to say 99 or 2000, around there, that I discovered there was such a thing as described video. And so it started there. The person who ran things was Mark Rosen, technically backed up by John Stubbs. And they basically taught me what described video was. And so I started with production, kind of writing shotgun for John, and then later writing shotgun for Mark as he directed recording sessions, and then started putting things together from the editing to the mixing and all that stuff. And eventually production led to actually voicing the description, because I was, I came in as a voicer, and so started doing that, and then started doing my own stuff, and then eventually got into writing, and then became creative director, and so it all started from there, from what became AMI.
Isn't that interesting? Taking a trip down memory lane and jumping in the old time machine. Now, Bear in mind, in 1999, 2000, I would have been in grade 8. So I was a
Wow.
teenager.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea of how far back that was. Now I like to think
Yep.
of myself as an old soul. But listen, in 1999 or 2000, when you got into doing described video, how readily available was programming that had been described?
Hmm. In terms of broadcast, it pretty much came down to the CBC in Canada. They were the first, to the best of my knowledge, the first Canadian broadcaster to have described video. I think the first project was the Arrow, although I'm not positive about that. And that's who we usually worked with in the early years. The Arrow actually preceded me. I think it was 97 off the top of my head. And the only way to get that was, unfortunately for some people, the same place to get it now, through the SAP, the Secondary Audio Program. Although there was some technical wizardry sometimes done to sort of do a simulcast a little bit with voice print and that sort of thing. So back then it was kind of a two-horse town, in that it was Audiovision Canada and CBC in Canada, and WGBH and PBS in the US.
Right.
That was kind of it at that time. One of the things Audiovision Canada used to do, though, is sell videos retail and to libraries. So back then it was VHS tapes, and we did our own movie. That's the bulk of actually what we did, was coming up with films. We had people trying to get rights or stuff that was public domain, and created our stuff and sold it as VHS and also as audio cassettes, which kind of trips in maybe to the podcast I think we may talk about later.
Yes.
So a great bulk of our production was retail, and a lot of it went to libraries. So I think the main source, I think back then, for an audience would be to find them in libraries if you could, or ask for them, or get stuff from the CBC. That was pretty much it back then.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of my earlier memories of described video is going to the CNIB library, where they had
Yes.
piles of these videos and you could get these old 1940s movies. And I'd never seen a described movie
That was
before. And
us.
it was such a great experience. But we've used a couple of terms today, and I tend to use them interchangeably. Described video is the same as audio description, which is the same as voiceover. Are they the same things, or do they refer to different things?
Voiceover refers to a more general skill set. Voiceover is just generally, that qualifies for commercials and anything you think an announcer does. We call it voiceover. So that's the more general thing for someone who speaks something audio-wise on a script or whatever. That's just voiceover. But described video and audio description are essentially the same thing. That described video is just basically the term that came up in Canada through the history of the development of the form. Audio description is the term that came up in the US and in England as it progressed and established itself. So most of the time they can be used interchangeably. So you're not doing anything wrong by
Okay, good.
making them interchangeable. Although there are some people who will, possibly say something specific about them, about each term, but that's roughly what it is. Describe video is in reference to visual medium. Audio description can qualify as things that aren't necessarily visual medium, or stuff that originally was but is put out as audio, like podcast or something like that. But yeah, basically interchangeable. And voiceover just means everything that is voiced.
Amazing. Hey, I have a question for you. I've always wanted to ask someone who's an expert in the field. If you set out to describe, let's say, a documentary, is that a different process, or does the description feel and sound very different compared to a scenario where you're describing, let's say a baseball game, for example?
First, it's a finer point to actually compare describing a documentary and play-by-play. Play-by-play is, like in radio, is kind of one of the original forms of audio description. I kind of think of it being two-pronged. The original forms of audio description would be that you'd hear on the radio, or radio drama, or sports, or when someone who has a vision impairment would go to a theater or watch TV with a relative or friend who is sighted. And they sit in the back, and the sighted person kind of leans over and goes, okay, this is happening, and this is happening, and that is happening. That's kind of the original. and Mark used to tell us that basically our goal is we're the best version of that. Of the person who is alongside you, letting you know what's happening, hopefully before you ask, because we want to get it all happening at the same time. Okay, play-by-play audio description in terms of a documentary, pretty much the same in that in sports play-by-play on radio, you have nothing. In video, well, anyone who listened to Toronto Blue Jays games on AMI will have some idea that there's a little bit of variation in that the people who would describe Jays games were working from the television broadcast and would sometimes deal with stats on screen and that sort of thing. As for a documentary, documentaries and educational material is handled quite differently, I think, than a drama or some sort of thing. When a documentary or educational thing kind of comes down to your who, what, where, when, why, but more of the who, what, when, where, how, because it's the original producer who is filling in the why. So it's just a matter of who everybody is, what's going on, where the change is happening in terms of person, in terms of location, in terms of elements that are being used. A lot of documentary is just basically keeping score. This person's talking, this person's talking, this person's talking. And then this person's coming back to talk. And if anything else comes up, then we handle that. But the main thing is kind of keeping score, and if anything is being demonstrated in terms of an educational thing. Over the years, of course, documentaries, not all documentaries are straight up talking heads, of course, and they've gotten more into narrative, developing characters, sometimes using various elements that fiction filmmakers would use. And so we have to get into that. And so we're sort of walking a line between the two forms at that time. And hopefully it remains kind of smooth. There really isn't a transition. In terms of fictional narrative, you're serving the story. It's all about the story and what the writers and producers of the original piece are intending to put forth. So we are an adjunct to that. We help. So what we describe, the priorities, come down to what matters most is what serves the story. What are we going to say that matters to the story they're trying to tell and the way they're presenting it? That's kind of the case with everything, but it's especially true when there is really a story and the piece is hanging on a story being told. So characters and locations and sometimes expressions, but again, we're an adjunct, so it comes down to what the original audio is trying to tell and what is missing. So we don't have to say someone is hesitating because you can hear they're hesitating. We're not going to say that someone is nervous when they clearly sound nervous. We let the sound design do a lot of the work, but when there's anything where it doesn't, then we move in and do our thing. So that's pretty much the difference, if that made any sense.
That made a lot of sense. It really
Thanks.
sounds like there's a lot of judgment calls that you need to make. I'm Joyita Gupta, and my guest today is Valerie Hunter, and we're talking all things described video or audio description. Valerie, before the break, I sort of touched on this idea that I do suspect that there is a degree of judgment involved in deciding what to put into the narrative when you're writing the script for described video and what you perhaps purposefully leave out. So what role does your judgment or intuition play in writing the script for described video?
I mean, we're humans, And usually there is only one human who is watching the film or TV show and writing what they see. Sometimes there may be small groups, or it may go through different editing processes and QC and stuff. But essentially it comes down to another member of the audience who happens to be sighted, who goes, okay, what's missing from here if I couldn't see this? What's going to, and again, as I was saying previously, what's going to serve the story?
Mm-hmm.
In the case of something educational, is what's going to help the student, the audience, learn what the producers want them to learn through this. So it's fairly equal that way. But although we learn certain standards of what goes in and what has priority, ideally we'll put everything in. And sometimes there are describers that will put everything in. It's a tricky balance. There are different kind of variations on schools of description as to how much to put in. The school I tend to hew towards, and how I was taught by Mark Rosen at Audiovision Canada, was to try to make it as seamless as possible. That if a person was, quote unquote, watching a TV show, that they would be getting from it as close to what a sighted person would be getting at the same time. That everyone would be experiencing similar elements of the TV show as synchronous as possible. Obviously, that's a goal. You can't get everything, but we do as much as we can to make it smooth. There are others between the sighted experience and the non-sighted sighted experience in terms of learning about a story. Now, obviously, there are judgment calls all over the place with that, because we are humans, and though we have these priorities, we'll see things and not see other things at the time we experience them. Maybe we will come back to them and go, oh, wait a minute, that's something that needs to go in. Well, why? Well, because it matters to what happens in the story later, without, showing anybody's hand too much. But it's relevant to the story later. So it's so that's kind of what some of the judgment comes down to. Again, it's going back to that OG experience of the two people in the back of the cinema going, oh, this is happening. Oh, this is happening. Oh, this is happening. And, that person, that sighted person, is like, they're experiencing the film at that moment and reacting to it. We kind of want to, at least I do, want a little bit of a sense of that in my description, while still being somewhat prepared, but not seeming like I'm too prepared. And because we're all reacting at the same time. So I don't want to take anybody out of the experience of the film itself. There are others who feel it's more important to basically fill in the screen for non-sighted person, to go, this is over here, and this is over here, this is over here, this over here. Well, that's quite important. In a lot of cases, we often don't have the time. Well, we always don't have the time to fill in everything. So that's another school of description, to try to fill everything in, all of the details, regardless of time. Or, well, not regardless of time, but I mean regardless in which you see those things and which they occur on the screen. And the audience is all over the place in terms of what they prefer better, just like any other audience preferences for any other style of presenting a thing. But mine tends to be a bit more synchronous. But that's part of why I kind of like the idea of being that, kind of person who's riding shotgun for the story, in terms of being a narrator or a tour guide sort of person who goes, well, this is over here, and this is over here, and this is over here. There's something a bit patronizing about that sometimes. Because there's no point in pretending you see everything and are telling everybody everything. There's no point in pretending to be the lone authority on this. And again, I believe it takes the audience out of the story. It's like they don't want to be dictated to. They want to experience this. So let's experience it with them. So those are kind of the thought processes that are going on in my mind while I'm doing this. I'm a describer. All I can be is just a describer. I'm trying not to dictate. I'm more trying to share my experience as best I possibly can to make the audience's experience of this as accurate as possible.
Yeah, no, for sure. And a work in progress, I'm sure, as well.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much that we could unpack in this, but unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock and it's ticking away. We've only got about 2 minutes left here. And I did say I wanted to talk to you about the podcast, Movies for the Blind. So tell us a little bit about the podcast and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
I can make it as short as possible, I think. When I left AVC, I decided I wanted to keep my chops up and do a podcast and do something that is a version of what AVC used to be called audio cinema, which was no video. It was put out on cassettes and stuff. So it was just audio. So Movies for the Blind, it was started about 2007, was a podcast of public domain films described audio only, a little bit of intro, a little bit of extra, in serialized form. They often would be broken up into 2 episodes, 3 episodes, that sort of thing. And so I did 300 episodes of that, and then I started from the beginning because sound got better. And so I kind of redid them a little bit, and I was doing that until, so it's 12 years in total. I did that, and there's and so it's still out there at moviesfortheblind.com. And so it's just basically movies as audiobooks that anybody can listen to. And there are some ideas that maybe I might continue it in the new year. We'll see what happens.
Oh, keep us posted. Hey, that sounds great. And I know what I'll be listening to in my spare time. Valerie Hunter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. This is fun.
Valerie Hunter is the founder of Valerie H Productions and an expert in audio description. You can catch her podcast, Movies for the Blind, wherever you get your podcast. And of course, you have a link on her website as well. If you missed any of our conversation, you can find our podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to like, rate, or subscribe. I want to thank Valerie Hunter for being on the program today. Nasreen Abdul-Majid is our technical producer. Andy Frank is the manager for AMI Audio, and Paula Deneen is our technical supervisor. Thanks a lot for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
This was an AMI podcast. For more accessible media, visit ami.ca.